In March 2011, a GPS navigator trusted by millions of drivers around the world will send a Canadian couple down a road that does not exist in any official database. Albert and Rita Crechion were planning a routine business trip to Las Vegas, but their electronic device will lead them to a place where there will be no help for hundreds of miles around. One wrong turn will turn a romantic trip into a struggle for survival that will test the limits of human faith and endurance. But the most striking thing about this story is not the navigation failure, but the sacrifice people are willing to make to survive. Albert Crechion was what his neighbors in Penticton called a morning optimist. At 59, he owned a thriving earth-moving company, but lived a simple life. Every morning began with a cheerful shout on the stairs, and every evening ended with a declaration of love to his wife. 38 years of marriage had taught him to appreciate the everyday moments of happiness. Rita was the opposite of her husband in temperament, but the perfect complement to his character. A calm, religious woman, at 56 she openly admitted that she did not like being alone. She rarely traveled without Albert, preferring the company of loved ones to crowds of strangers. The Bible in her backpack was not a tribute to tradition, but a source of daily strength. There was an unspoken division of roles in their family, developed over decades of living together. Albert was the source of decisions and energy, ready to take responsibility in any situation. Rita provided stability and emotional support. Their company thrived thanks to his entrepreneurial acumen and her practicality. They had achieved the balance that many couples seek their entire lives. Their life in Penticton was measured and successful. Active members of the Church of the Nazarene, they found meaning in their faith and service to the community. Albert ran the business with the enthusiasm of a young entrepreneur, while Rita maintained the family home and assisted with the company. Over the course of their 38-year marriage, they became not just spouses, but a true team. March 2011 brought them an opportunity to combine business with pleasure. A trade show in Las Vegas required the presence of the company's owners, and they had long wanted to visit the city of entertainment. Instead of a boring direct route on the freeways, they chose a scenic route through the mountains and deserts of the American West. It took them the whole evening to pack the van. Rita, with the meticulousness of an experienced traveler, packed everything they needed: a mix of nuts and candy for snacks, fish oil for health, warm blankets for cold nights, and a small shovel that would later play an important role. The road Bible took its usual place in the top pocket of her backpack. The navigator had already proven its reliability, guiding them flawlessly through Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. They trusted the device completely. The weather promised to be perfect, the mood was high, and the upcoming trip promised romance and new experiences. Everything was ready for a trip that was supposed to be one of the best memories of their lives. March 19, 2011 began as a normal day of travel. Albert and Rita left Penticton early in the morning, following their usual route across the U.S. border. The GPS confidently guided them along the federal highway through the picturesque areas of Idaho. Mountain landscapes gave way to valleys, and the device counted the miles to the next turn with mechanical precision. The mistake happened near Mountain Home, Idaho. Instead of continuing on the main highway, Albert turned onto a local road toward Mountain City, Nevada. Perhaps he was distracted by a conversation with his wife, or perhaps he misunderstood the navigator's instructions. Either way, this turn added 180 miles and 3 hours to their route. When the GPS recalculated the route and suggested a shortcut through a forest road to the main highway leading straight to Jackpot, Nevada, the decision seemed logical. Why make a detour through Wells when the navigator showed a more direct route? Albert turned off the paved highway onto a dirt road in the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest. The first few miles were reassuring. The road was narrow but passable. The scenery became increasingly wild and beautiful. Snow still lay on the mountain peaks, but down below, spring was in the air. Nothing foreshadowed trouble until the road began to deteriorate noticeably. The road led through the Jarbidge Wilderness, one of the most remote places in the continental United States. The asphalt quickly gave way to dirt, and then the real trouble began. Potholes filled with spring mud and washed out sections with deep ruts. The A Chevrolet Astro, without four-wheel drive, began to slip on the wet patches. After 5.5 miles of driving like this, Rita said what they were both thinking. "This doesn't look right." The road had turned into a narrow track between rocks and bushes. There were no other cars in sight, and the GPS continued to confidently show the direction. The disaster struck in a low-lying area where spring rains had turned the ground into a mud trap. Albert tried to drive through carefully, but the wheels began to spin in the sticky mud. The harder he pressed the gas pedal, the deeper the van sank into the quagmire. The first attempts to free the vehicle took several hours. Albert rocked the car between gears. Rita placed rocks under the wheels, and they dug at the mud with a small shovel. They even managed to temporarily free the van and drive a few feet. Hope flared brightly, but the Astro ended up in an even deeper hole. This time, no amount of effort helped. The van was stuck fast in the mud, 980 feet from the nearest normal road. By the evening of March 19th, it was clear that they would not be able to get out on their own. The first night in the stuck van was a test of their optimism. Albert was more distraught than Rita had ever seen him in their years of marriage. Usually calm and confident, he paced around the vehicle, assessing the situation over and over, but the van was stuck. Rita tried to calm him down. "It's late and we're tired," she said, suggesting they wait until morning. But the reality was harsh. They were far from civilization, without cell service, and their food supplies weren't meant for a long stop. The temperature dropped below freezing at night. Together, they knelt down next to the van and prayed. "God, what should we do?" Tears mixed with the spring fog. They knew they had made a mistake trusting the GPS, but there were no recriminations. On the morning of March 20th, Albert climbed the nearest hill with his cell phone. For a few seconds, he managed to get a weak signal and call 911. He managed to give his approximate coordinates, but the connection was lost and never restored. They spent the second night in the van, covered with blankets and hoping that help was on the way. The morning of March 22nd brought the realization that they could wait for help indefinitely. 3 days trapped had taught them to assess the situation realistically. Food supplies were limited, the fuel tank would last for a few days of heating at most, and spring nights in the Nevada mountains were cold. Albert made a decision that would divide their fates forever. One of them had to go for help while the other stayed with the van and supplies. The alternatives were discussed briefly. Rita was suffering from knee pain that limited her mobility. Albert, at 59, was in good physical shape and could walk the 6 miles to Mountain City across rough terrain. Going together meant abandoning the van with supplies and risking both their lives in unfamiliar terrain. Staying together meant a slow death from hunger and cold, with no guarantee of being found. Albert's decision to go alone was logical, but no less painful. It didn't take long to prepare for the journey. Albert took a backpack, a GPS device that would guide him to Mountain City, and a minimum of provisions, leaving most of the supplies with Rita. They agreed that she would wait in the van, rest, and try to distract herself somehow. The farewell was painful. They prayed together, asking God for protection and wisdom. Albert hugged his wife and said the familiar words, "I love you." Those words had been spoken every day of their marriage, but now they carried special weight. Rita tried to be strong, knowing that her tears would only make it harder for Albert to leave. In the morning fog of March 22nd, Albert set course for the northeast, toward Mountain City. The GPS showed a direct route through the mountains and canyons. He drove confidently, looking back and waving until the fog swallowed his silhouette. Rita was left alone in a stuck van in the middle of the endless desert of the American West. She had a few handfuls of nuts, some candy, and faith that her husband would return with help. But hours passed, and there was no sign of him. Rita spent her first days of solitude meticulously organizing. A woman who did not like to be alone, even in a crowd, was forced to create a system for survival in complete isolation. The structure of her day became her salvation from panic and despair. Every morning began with prayer. Rita opened her travel Bible and read the prayer that had become her spiritual anchor. "Preserve my soul, O Lord, for I am godly. Save your servant." These words gave her the strength to face a new day of uncertainty. Rationing food required iron discipline. Rita poured her daily ration of mixed nuts into her palm, 1 tablespoon, to which she added 1 piece of candy and a fish oil tablet. Her entire daily ration fit in 1 handful, but she stretched it out over the course of the day. Finding water became a daily ritual and their main source of survival in their disaster. Incredibly, just a few dozen feet from the van ran a clear mountain stream. Without this source, Rita would have died in 3 days, like anyone without water. Twice a day, she forced herself to overcome the pain in her knee and go down to the water. Rita scooped up the icy mountain water with plastic bottles and mugs she found in the van, filling every available container. The water was crystal clear and so cold it made her fingers numb, but it was the only resource she didn't ration. Keeping a diary became a way to stay connected to reality and her last hope for rescue. Rita methodically recorded the coordinates of Albert's route, marked each day of her confinement, and noted changes in her health and the weather. These notes were to be her last message to her family if she did not survive. For potential rescuers, Rita left a note on the dashboard, where every word was chosen with desperate precision. Help! Stuck since March 19, 2011. My husband went to Mountain City to look for help and has not returned. She rewrote the note several times, making her handwriting clearer and adding the date so that a passerby would immediately notice it and understand the scale of the tragedy if she suddenly fell asleep. The diary and note became her way of screaming for help in the absolute silence of the American wilderness, where no one could hear her. For the first 2 weeks, Rita remained relatively active. She went to the stream, kept the van tidy, prayed, and hoped to hear the sound of her husband returning. Albert was a strong man, and if anyone could bring help, it was him. While Rita was establishing a routine for survival in the Nevada mountains, another drama was unfolding in Canada. At the end of March, their son Raymond Cretion became concerned when his parents did not show up at a trade show in Las Vegas and did not contact him. Albert was a punctual businessman who never missed important business meetings without warning. Raymond contacted the police and began contacting the U.S. authorities. By early April, it was clear that Albert and Rita Cretion had disappeared somewhere in the vastness of the American West. The family knew about their plans to visit Las Vegas via a scenic route, but the exact details of their journey were unknown. The Elko County Sheriff's Office in Nevada took charge of coordinating the search. Sergeant David Prawl organized search teams using information about the couple's last known movements. A brief call from Albert to 911 provided approximate coordinates, but the search area covered hundreds of square miles. The Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest presented enormous challenges for the search operation. Spring weather added to the problems. Fog limited visibility for helicopters, mud made roads impassable, and snow blocked access to high-altitude areas. Local residents joined the search as volunteers. Bill Landon and other Mountain City residents knew every trail in the area, but even their experience could not compensate for the vastness of the terrain. "These mountains are treacherous," Landon told reporters. "The mud is knee-deep here, and when it rains, the roads turn into mud." The story of the Canadian couple's disappearance attracted media attention. Canadian television stations began covering the search, and American publications picked up the story of the missing tourists who were headed to Las Vegas. The church community in Penticton organized prayer meetings for Albert and Rita, but while rescue services combed the woods, Rita slowly weakened in her mud trap. By the end of the first month, her daily diet of 100-200 calories was beginning to take a serious toll on her physical condition. By the 5th week of April, she had lost nearly 22 pounds, and every step toward the creek was agonizing. Search parties continued to work, but to no avail. Time was working against everyone. Against Rita, who was slowly dying of starvation, against Albert, whose fate remained unknown, and against the rescuers, who were looking for a needle in a haystack the size of a state. May 6, 2011, was the 49th day of Rita Chrétien's ordeal. She woke up realizing that her body could no longer withstand constant starvation. In 7 weeks, she had lost 28 pounds, transforming from a healthy middle-aged woman into an emaciated shadow of her former self. Her attempt to reach a stream for water nearly proved fatal. Rita struggled to reach a familiar spot, but the return trip required superhuman effort. She literally crawled up the slope, stopping every few feet. Chest pains and a racing heartbeat indicated that her body was beginning to shut down. When she reached the van, Rita realized that this was the end. For the first time during her ordeal, she allowed herself to think of death not as a distant possibility, but as a near reality. With the last of her strength, Rita tidied herself up, as if preparing for her final journey. She carefully folded the diary with all her notes from the 49 days of the ordeal and placed notes for rescuers in a visible place so that whoever found her body would understand what had happened. Wrapping herself in a blanket on the back seat of the van, she felt a strange sense of peace. Rita recited a childhood prayer she had learned as a child. "Lord, I go to sleep. I entrust my soul to you. If I die before dawn, call my soul to you." These simple words, repeated by millions of children before bedtime, now took on a prophetic meaning. For the first time in 49 days of struggle, Rita was ready to let go of life. Not out of despair, but out of a deep acceptance of God's will. A strange calm filled her heart. 49 days of struggle were coming to an end, but she felt no fear or bitterness. The faith that had sustained her all this time enabled her to accept her fate with dignity. Rita closed her eyes and fell into a sleep that could be her last. 2 hours later, she was awakened by the sound of engines. At first she thought it was a hallucination, but the sound of ATVs grew louder. Her survival instinct overcame her exhaustion. Rita found the strength to get up and get out of the van. 3 people on ATVs appeared around the bend in the road like a vision from another world. Chad and Whitney Herman, along with their father Troy, were searching for moose antlers in the wilderness when they noticed something incredible. A minivan, stuck in the mud in a place where there shouldn't have been a single living soul. The hunters were locals who knew every mile of these places, but they had never seen anything like this before. The van looked like a spaceship that had fallen from the sky. When an emaciated woman, more like a skeleton covered in skin, emerged from it, they realized they were witnessing a miracle. "We're stupid Canadians," Rita whispered in a voice that was barely audible. Every word came with difficulty. "The navigator brought us here and we got stuck. My husband left for help over a month ago. He's strong. He's a fighter." Even on the brink of death, at the moment of her own incredible rescue, her thoughts were only of Albert. Chad Herman looked at this woman and couldn't believe his eyes. 49 days alone in the American wilderness, and she was alive. Chad immediately contacted emergency services via radio. A medical helicopter was dispatched to the rescue coordinates. By the evening of May 6th, Rita Chrétien was at the Twin Falls Medical Center, receiving her first professional medical care in 49 days. Rita had been rescued, but the question of Albert's fate remained unanswered. Where was he? Was he alive? Would the rescue services, now with the exact coordinates of his route, be able to find him? At the Twin Falls Hospital, Rita Chrétien became a medical miracle. Dr. James Westbury had never seen anything like it in his 20 years of practice. The woman had lost 28 pounds in 49 days, almost a quarter of her body weight. Her daily diet consisted of less than 200 calories, while her body was burning at least 1,200. Medical literature describes isolated cases of survival after such extreme starvation lasting longer than a month. Most people die after 30-40 days without food. Rita lasted 49 days, remaining conscious and able to move. According to all medical standards, she should have died of multiple organ failure, but her heart was beating, her kidneys were working, and her brain was functioning. Doctors could not explain how the 56-year-old woman's body had withstood such exhaustion and remained viable. Intravenous nutrition was administered carefully, and IVs with glucose and electrolytes restored her water and salt balance. Chest pain and difficulty breathing turned out to be symptoms of cardiovascular stress from exhaustion, but without critical abnormalities. Rita was recovering quickly. Her mind remained clear, and her psychological state was surprisingly stable. Instead of traumatic stress, doctors observed a woman with deep inner strength who accepted her rescue as a gift from above. Raymond Creechan flew to Idaho as soon as he received news of his mother's rescue. The reunion in the hospital room was filled with tears of relief and anxiety for Albert's fate. Rita gave the rescue services all the entries from her diary, including the GPS coordinates of her husband's route and the exact time he left. 4 days later, Rita was discharged to continue her recovery at home in Penticton. The prognosis was optimistic. Her body showed remarkable resilience. Rita's rescue gave new impetus to the search for Albert. Detective Jim Carpenter of the Elko County Sheriff's Office received accurate information about the time and direction of his departure. GPS coordinates from Rita's diary narrowed the search area considerably and focused efforts on the route between the stranded van and Mountain City. On May 7, 2011, the largest search operation in the history of the area began. Sheriff Jim Pitt assigned 20 officers and technicians, including horse patrols, all-terrain vehicles, and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging equipment. Local volunteers familiar with every canyon and trail joined the official teams. The first weeks of the search yielded several false leads. Helicopter pilots reported sightings that, upon closer inspection, turned out to be natural formations or debris left behind by other tourists. Search dogs picked up a trail several times but lost it on rocky terrain or in areas washed out by spring streams. By the end of May, it became clear that Albert had not followed a direct route to Mountain City. Ground teams found no traces of him along the presumed route. Albert had lost his way in the fog and snow. The winter of 2011-2012 forced the active search to be suspended. The official operation was called off, but local hunters and tourists were given photos of Albert and a description of his equipment. The family did not lose hope that someone would come across traces of the missing Canadian. On October 30, 2012, that hope was tragically fulfilled. Rodney Thompson and Jay Duck, moose hunters from Elko, were climbing Merritt Mountain when they noticed a backpack neatly placed in plain sight among the rocks at an altitude of 8,000 feet. A few feet from the backpack, sheltered by a large tree, lay the remains of Albert Creechan. The skeleton was completely preserved, still wearing clothes, with a blanket and personal belongings nearby. A wallet with documents allowed the remains to be identified immediately. Albert had climbed Merritt Mountain, possibly in an attempt to find a better view of the area or cell phone reception, but got lost in the snow and fog. A forensic examination determined the cause of death to be a combination of exhaustion and hypothermia. He died within the first week after leaving camp, between March 25 and 30, 2011. The position of the body and the placement of the backpack indicated that he remained conscious until the end. The news of Albert's discovery reached his family on October 31, 2012. Henry Creechan, the brother of the deceased, spoke at a press conference on behalf of the family. "We had long come to the conclusion that Albert was already in heaven. Now we have an understanding of his last day here on earth. Now we have comfort and closure. We say, praise the Lord." For Rita, the discovery of the body was a painful but necessary end to 18 months of uncertainty. "I think I really accepted his death a long time ago, but it was very important to finally know what happened to him," she told reporters. The most important thing for her was knowing that Albert had died peacefully, protected by a tree, and that his body had not been harmed by wild animals. The circumstances of her husband's death did not cause Rita any bitterness or recriminations. Albert had traveled an incredible distance across rough terrain in an attempt to save them both. Detective David Prowl noted the bravery of the deceased. Mr. Cretan showed incredible courage in going through the mountains to rescue his wife. For Rita, it was not a failure, but a heroic attempt worthy of the memory of their marriage. Rita continued to drive the same Chevrolet Astro that had been pulled out of the mud trap by rescue services. This symbolic gesture showed her refusal to be broken by circumstances. The van that almost became her grave became a reminder of the strength of the human spirit. The main legacy of Albert and Rita Cretan's story is a testament to the power of love and faith. Daily declarations of love, a willingness to sacrifice one's life to save a loved one, and the ability to find meaning and hope in the darkest of circumstances. Albert began each day with a cheerful shout on the stairs, expressing his joy at the simple fact of being alive. This zest for life and love of life did not die with him in the mountains of Nevada, but lived on in the memory of Rita and those who learned their story. The story of Albert and Rita Cretan makes us think about things we prefer not to notice in our daily lives. How dependent are we on technology? GPS guides us every day, but are we prepared for the moment when it fails us? How many of us check the route on maps or ask locals for directions? But the main question in this story is much deeper. What are you willing to do for the person you love most? Could you, like Albert, go into the unknown, knowing you might not return? Or, like Rita, wait 49 days in complete solitude, believing in the impossible? Write in the comments what you think about this story. Do you condemn the couple for trusting the navigator, or do you sympathize with their tragedy? If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more incredible stories ahead about what people are capable of in extreme conditions. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episodes. Sometimes, the difference between life and death is just half a tank of gas, a dead cell phone, and a wrong turn at a fork in the road. In the mountains of Oregon, such simple mistakes can be fatal. The Pacific Northwest, with its mesmerizing beauty, takes its toll every year on those who underestimate its grandeur. In the winter of 2006, temperatures in the Oregon mountains dropped to 21.2 degrees F, and snowstorms turned narrow dirt roads into treacherous traps. Asphalt gave way to slush, and cell phone reception disappeared between tall pine trees and steep cliffs. Here, in these mountains, where fog hides precipices and blizzards bury road signs, even modern navigation systems are useless. Locals cherish memories of tragedies on these roads as part of the region's folklore. In 1994, DeWitt Finley, a motorhome salesman from Montana, became one of the stories rangers tell tourists as a warning. His car, stuck in the snow on Bear Camp Road, was found months after he disappeared, but by then hunger and exhaustion had already taken their toll. There are places where the line between adventure and disaster is razor thin. For the Kim family, that line was somewhere between turning off the main road and the first snowflakes falling on their windshield. What started as a routine drive home would soon become a story that would forever change the rules of rescue operations and force us to take a new look at the value of human life. James Kim was no ordinary family man. At 35, he had already built an impressive career in technology, becoming senior editor at CNET, where his reviews of MP3 players and digital audio devices were read by hundreds of thousands of people. His video podcasts and Lab Rat segment turned serious technical reviews into an entertaining show. His colleagues valued him not only for his professionalism, but also for his boundless enthusiasm, a quality he brought to his family life. His wife, Katie, a 30-year-old owner of 2 successful boutiques in San Francisco, was the perfect partner, creative and business-minded with refined taste and an entrepreneurial streak. She grew up in the harsh environment of New Mexico, which would later prove to be a critical factor in her survival. Their daughters, 4-year-old Penelope, with her lively eyes and restless nature, and 7-month-old Sabine, just beginning to discover the world, were the center of their universe. For James and Katie, children were no obstacle to adventure. They took them everywhere, from road trips along the coast to hiking in the mountains. In the fall of 2006, the Kim family was on the verge of change. James and Katie were seriously considering moving from San Francisco to Seattle or Portland, places with a more relaxed pace of life and greenery, ideal for raising children. A trip to Seattle for Thanksgiving was not just a family visit, but also a reconnaissance mission. They were checking out the city as a potential new home. A festive dinner with the family, walks through the rain-soaked streets of Seattle, and discussions about business and job opportunities filled them with enthusiasm before they returned home. They spent several happy days enjoying each other's company, planning for the future, and unaware that the return trip would change their lives forever. On Friday, November 24, 2006, the Kim family began their journey home from Seattle. The route included a stop in Portland, where Katie planned to meet a friend for lunch. This meeting influenced the course of events that followed. After lunch, the family decided not to drive all the way to San Francisco, but to split the trip in two, stopping for the night in a picturesque location. The couple unfolded a Rand McNally paper map, a familiar sight in 2006, when GPS navigators were not yet an integral part of every car. On the map, they noticed Tudo Tuno Lodge on the Oregon coast near Gold Beach, an ideal place to stay, located about halfway between Portland and San Francisco. Katie called the lodge and booked a room. Terry Stone, who took the reservation, was slightly concerned about the late arrival of a family with small children, but James was determined to stay there. The family left Portland in the afternoon and headed south. Around 9 p.m., they stopped for dinner at a Denny's restaurant in Roseburg. Tired after a long day with 2 small children, they studied the map, trying to determine the best route to Tututun Lodge. According to their plan, they had about 2.5 hours to drive to the lodge. After leaving the restaurant, they were supposed to turn onto Highway 42, which leads to the coast. But in the dark, exhausted from the road, they missed the turn. Realizing their mistake, they stopped to study the map again. The map showed an alternative route, a road called Bear Camp Road, which also led to the coast. On paper, it looked like a perfectly acceptable option. But what the map didn't show was critically important. Bear Camp Road was a narrow, winding mountain road, unmaintained in winter, with steep, unguarded drops rising 4,000 feet. None of the Kims knew that this seemingly ordinary road had a grim reputation among locals. They didn't know about DeWitt Finley, whose fate could have served as a warning. They simply trusted the map and turned onto the road that promised the shortest route to their destination. The first few miles of Bear Camp Road held no promise of trouble. The narrow but paved road wound its way into the mountains. However, as they gained altitude, the situation changed rapidly. Snow began to fall, significantly reducing visibility, and the temperature dropped with every 100 feet of elevation. About 2 hours' drive from the restaurant, James realized they had lost their way. At mile marker 12, where the main Bear Camp Road turns and looks like a secondary road, and the road leading off to the side looks like the main road, they made a fateful choice. Perhaps due to the snowfall, fatigue, or simply the deceptive configuration of the intersection, James turned onto a narrow logging road instead of following the main road. This split-second decision proved to be a turning point. The road was not just impassable in winter, it had been abandoned for the cold season. The entrance should have been blocked by a barrier, but for some reason there was none. Nothing prevented the Kims from turning onto it. The road became increasingly difficult to navigate. Snow accumulated, the ruts grew deeper, and obstacles such as branches and rocks became more frequent. James drove with extreme caution, clutching the steering wheel, the windshield wipers working at full power. At times, the road was so blocked that he had to stop and get out to clear the way. Katie tried to call 911, but there was no signal. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, she told James that they needed to turn around and go back the way they came. He agreed, and for several hours James drove the car in reverse along a narrow, winding road with steep drops on one side. This maneuver required incredible concentration, especially with limited visibility in unfamiliar terrain. Finally, they returned to the fork they had seen several hours earlier and decided it was too dangerous to continue. Besides, James was exhausted and thought it would be better to spend the night there and assess the situation in the morning. When they woke up the next morning, November 26th, the Kim family found themselves at a three-way fork in the road. They studied the map, trying to determine their location. They had a choice: return along the same dangerous route they had taken the day before, or try to turn left and descend the mountain. The road on the left looked wider than the ones they had been on, but there were no signs. In the end, they decided to stay put, believing that being at the fork would increase their chances of being found. The situation was becoming serious. The Kim family was trapped among mountains, remote canyons, and logging roads leading nowhere. They had seen a snowplow at the entrance to Bear Camp Road and hoped that it would pass by regularly to clear the road. But the machine did not appear on the first day or the second. The temperature was dropping, food supplies were dwindling, and 4 pairs of eyes were looking less and less at the road and more at the sky, the endless, empty, indifferent sky from which rescue might come. But the sky remained silent. In this silence, only 4 beating hearts remained, and a decision that would soon have to be made. In the first days of being stuck, the Kim family strictly rationed their resources. The engine was only turned on for short periods of time to heat the cabin, making gasoline a precious resource. The temperature outside regularly dropped to 21.2 degrees Celsius, seeping through cracks in the doors and windows, and forcing the family to huddle together to stay warm. Food supplies quickly became a critical issue. The initial supply, a few bags of snacks, baby food for Sabine, a couple of boxes of rice cereal, and bottles of water, was meant to last a day or two on a normal trip. By November 28th, food was running out, and Katie made a decision that would ultimately save her daughters' lives. She resumed breastfeeding not only for 7-month-old Sabina, but also for 4-year-old Penelope, who had long since been weaned. Every morning, James surveyed the surrounding area, trying to find signs of a road under the incessant snowfall. The couple tried to contact 911 every day, but there was no cell phone signal in the mountain canyon. Outside the window, there was only a silent white expanse with no sign of civilization. By the end of the week, the psychological tension was mounting, but for the sake of their children, the couple maintained a visible calm. They played with Penelope, sang songs, told stories, did everything they could to ease the oppressive atmosphere of isolation. The metal body of the minivan became a small island of life in the winter desert, where every sound from outside was perceived as a potential rescue, but invariably turned out to be just a trick of nature. James's expression changed with each passing day. Usually optimistic and energetic, he became increasingly focused and silent. By the dim light of a flashlight, he studied the map, obviously pondering some serious decision, but he did not share his thoughts with Katie. The 7th day of being stranded, December 3rd, was marked by a critical event. They ran out of gas. The last drops of fuel burned in the engine, and with them went their main source of heat. The minivan that had served as their shelter turned into a frozen metal box. James decided to use a tire for a signal fire. After removing the wheel with incredible effort, he lit a heavy black smoke in the snow, a universal sign of distress. Weakened by hunger and cold, he methodically kept the fire going, throwing branches and combustible materials from the car onto it. Katie watched from the window as he, covered in soot, struggled to raise the signal above the treetops. A brief hope arose when a small plane flew overhead. The silhouette of its fuselage seemed so close that the smoke from the fire must have been visible. James signaled desperately, while Katie hugged the girls in the car, whispering words of hope. However, the aircraft flew over them and disappeared behind the mountains without changing course. They were not noticed. That moment was a psychological turning point. The black column of smoke, their last hope for passive rescue, dissolved into the air along with their belief that they would be found just waiting in the car. In the evening, when the children were asleep, James and Katie had the most difficult conversation of their marriage. By the dim light of a flashlight, James studied the map, marking their approximate location and drawing a line to the nearest town, Gallus. According to his calculations, it was only 4 miles on foot, 4 miles through the winter forest to where there were people, phones, and help. "If I don't go, we'll all die here," he said, looking at his sleeping daughters. Katie objected, afraid to let him go alone in a snowstorm without proper clothing, food, or communication. But deep down, she knew that the alternative was the slow death of her entire family in a frozen car. The approaching night became a time of difficult decisions. James would leave at dawn, taking with him a backpack, a map, and some water. He would find help and return for his family, their only chance. The couple discussed the details: what to do if he didn't return by a certain time, how long to wait, what steps to take. Some things remained unsaid. They were too frightening to voice. Early in the morning of December 2nd, 2006, at 7:45 a.m., James left the car, promising to return before sunset. He was wearing tennis shoes, the worst footwear for a winter hike, a light jacket, and jeans. The only useful items he had with him were a backpack with a map, a lighter, and a bottle of water. This equipment, catastrophically inadequate for winter mountain conditions, sealed his fate. For Katja, a period of agonizing waiting began. Every minute stretched into an eternity as she tried to keep the children occupied with games and stories, but her gaze kept returning to the clock and the window. Without a working engine, the car turned into an icebox, and Katja had to force her daughters to move around and do simple exercises, anything to generate even a small amount of heat. 13 hours, the time James had promised to return, came and went, but he was nowhere to be seen. Katie got out of the car, peered into the forest, and shouted his name, but the echo of emptiness was the only response. The terrible truth began to sink in. James had gotten lost, or worse, had been unable to withstand the cold. The chances of surviving the night in the forest in sub-zero temperatures, without shelter or warm clothes, were slim. Darkness was gathering outside the window, and there was no contact with the outside world. According to Katie's calculations, they should have returned to San Francisco on November 27th. Now, it was December 3rd, and it seemed unlikely that anyone was looking for them. On December 4th, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Katie made a difficult decision. James had not returned, so she would have to act on her own. She dressed the children in all the clothes she could find, took a minimal supply of water, and the most necessary items, including a pink umbrella, a bright spot that would attract attention from the air, and a mirror from her makeup bag to signal for help. Katie's first steps in the deep snow were extremely difficult, especially with Sabine in her arms and Penelope, whom she had to practically carry. After walking a few hundred feet, she realized that they would not survive in such conditions. At this critical moment, something happened that would later be called a miracle. Katie heard a mechanical sound that stood out sharply from the natural rustling of the forest, the sound of a helicopter engine. A helicopter passed over the treetops, and Katie instinctively began waving her bright umbrella, running out into a relatively open space. The helicopter circled once, then twice, and began to descend. Thus ended 9 days of isolation for Katie and her daughters. John Recor, a local businessman and pilot from Central Point, acting on his own initiative, discovered the family and radioed the rescuers. Soon, Katie, Penelope, and Sabine were taken to Three Rivers Community Hospital in Grants Pass. At the time of her rescue, Katie believed that James had probably already reached civilization and organized a search, but the reality was different. Instead of 4 miles to Gallus, as the map showed, the actual distance was more than 15 miles through impassable terrain. James overcame incredible obstacles and walked more than 16 miles. a phenomenal distance for a man in his condition. Following the river in the hope that it would lead him to people, James ventured deep into the steep-sided Big Windy Creek Canyon. He scrambled over slippery rocks, climbed over fallen trees, and crossed icy streams. Every step was an act of willpower, but he kept going, knowing that his family depended on him. James Kim's body was found at noon on December 6th, lying in the icy waters of Big Windy Creek. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was hypothermia, and he had died approximately 2 days after leaving the car. His sacrifice was not in vain. It was James' absence that prompted rescuers to expand the search area and commit maximum resources. The tracks he left in the snow helped determine the family's route and the location of the minivan. As Joe Hyatt, who led the search team, said, "He showed what a tremendous love he had for his family." While events in the Oregon mountains unfolded with tragic inevitability, outside the snow-covered forest, the hidden mechanisms of the search operation were just beginning to get underway. James' colleagues at CNEAT, concerned about his absence from the office, filed a missing person report with the San Francisco police on November 30th, 2006. Katie's boutique manager, Charlene Wright, also contacted the authorities, noting that her employer had not returned on time. The San Francisco Police Department quickly discovered that the Kim family had used a credit card at a Denny's restaurant in Roseburg on November 25th. This information redirected the search to southern Oregon, but the initial search area remained vast and undefined. Without precise information about the family's route after dinner, the situation seemed almost hopeless. On December 1st, search coordinator Josephine Sarah Rubrecht and Deputy Sheriff Jason Stanton visited Bear Camp Road, intuitively aware of its reputation as a winter trap. However, without clear landmarks, it was impossible to find any traces of the minivan. The search remained chaotic due to a lack of resources and centralized leadership. Meanwhile, Spencer Kim, James's father, couldn't sit idly by. He flew out of his home on the East Coast to Oregon and hired 3 helicopters from Carson Helicopters, based in Merlin, to join the search. His decisive actions would later play a critical role. The breakthrough came on December 2nd, when Edge Wireless engineers Eric Fugua and Noah Pagsy, acting on their own initiative, analyzed cell tower records. They discovered that the Kim family's phone had sent an automatic ping to a tower in Wolf Creek at 1:30 a.m. on November 26th. This narrowed the search area to the Bear Camp Road area, but the use of this data was delayed due to bureaucratic obstacles and privacy laws. By December 3rd, the search operation had expanded significantly. More than 80 volunteers, including local hunters and foresters, joined professional rescuers. The Oregon National Guard sent a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging cameras. Private helicopters hired by Spencer Kim methodically combed the area around Big Windy Creek. John Rekar, a local businessman and pilot from Central Point, knew the area better than most. On December 4th, guided by intuition and local knowledge, he took his helicopter into the air. Rekar decided to check not only the main Bear Camp Road, but also the numerous side roads that were rarely visited even in summer. That was his advantage. He didn't think like a rescuer, but like a local who knew every twist and turn of the mountains. "I was following bear tracks, which are round, and suddenly I saw these long, thin prints," Rekar later recalled. From a height of only 10 feet above the ground, he could make out the tread pattern on the snow. The tracks, presumably left by James Kim, allowed the pilot to determine the direction of the search. Then came what the Oregon State Police called a miracle. Rekar spotted a woman waving a pink umbrella, jumping up and down with children nearby. Although his helicopter could not land, a Crowman S-61 helicopter soon dropped a survival kit, and another pilot was able to land 200 yards from the Kim family's Saab. Half an hour later, Katie and the girls landed at Grants Pass Airport in Merlin, ending their 9-day struggle for survival. But the joy of rescue was overshadowed by James's absence. Katie, who initially believed that her rescue had been organized by her husband, was horrified to learn that he had not been found. Now the search focused exclusively on James Kim. Katie provided valuable information about his presumed route and time of departure. Rescuers found tracks leading from a logging road to Big Windy Creek. Pieces of clothing on tree branches confirmed that James had deliberately left markers, possibly for his return journey or to help rescuers. At dawn on December 5th, about 100 rescuers from 7 counties, 2 federal agencies, and the Oregon State Police methodically combed the canyon. Search teams from Eugene and Lane County descended into the gorge, following James's markings. Fragments of the map and clothing confirmed the direction he had taken. Helicopters hired by Spencer Kim dropped food and blankets into the canyon, hoping James was still alive. Their efforts were desperate, but sincere. No one involved in the search wanted to give up. On December 6, 2006, at 12:03 p.m., a Carson helicopter's pilot spotted James' body in Big Windy Creek, half a mile from where the creek joined the Rogue River. James was lying on his back in 1 to 2 feet of icy water. Jackson County SWAT rescuers confirmed his death. A subsequent autopsy determined that James died of hypothermia approximately 2 days after leaving the vehicle. Josephine County Undersheriff Brian Anderson was unable to finish the press conference, breaking down in tears when James' death was announced. His reaction reflected the emotions of the entire rescue team, who in a short time had come to deeply respect a man who sacrificed himself to save his family. The rescue of Katie and her daughters, followed by the discovery of James' body, completed the physical aspect of the tragedy, but its psychological and social consequences were only beginning to unfold. The tech community, where James was a prominent figure, responded by creating a memorial fund to support his daughters. CNET launched an online guest book where nearly 2,000 people left their condolences and words of support. The Kim family's story quickly gained national attention, becoming one of the most talked about news stories of 2006. CNN, ABC News, NBC, and other major television networks broadcast daily updates on the search and then mournful reports on James' death. Local publications such as The Oregonian and Mail Tribune published detailed coverage, including interviews with rescuers and analysis of what went wrong. The public reaction to the tragedy was a wave of criticism directed at the organizations responsible for road safety and search and rescue operations. Spencer Kim, in an article for the Washington Post on January 6, 2007, pointed to a number of systemic problems: an unclosed road barrier, delayed use of cell phone data, and a lack of unified command in the early days of the search. California Senator Dianne Feinstein sent a letter to Interior Secretary Dirk Kempthorne demanding an investigation into the barrier incident. An investigation by the Bureau of Land Management revealed that 3 employees were aware of the problem, but took no action. However, even with flawless work by rescue services, the outcome could have been the same. The harsh reality of the Winter Mountains left no room for error. A memorial service for James Kim was held on February 18, 2007, in Golden Gate Park, attended by hundreds of people, many of whom had never met him personally, but were moved by his selflessness. The experience of the Kim family led to significant changes in road safety and search and rescue procedures in the region. New warning signs were installed on Bear Camp Road and adjacent roads. John Riker personally installed a bright red sign on Gallus Access Road with the message, "Danger, remote road ahead, you could get stuck and die." A more significant achievement was the creation of the California-Oregon Regional Search and Rescue, CORSAR, which brought together 8 counties for joint training and operations. Rescue Coordinator Sarah Rubrick noted, "Search and rescue services are 1,000,000 times better than they were in 2006, thanks to relationships, resource sharing, and cross-training." Oregon legislation was changed to simplify access to credit card and phone data in emergencies. The Oregon State Police improved protocols for quickly tracking cell phone pings, and telecom engineers began training rescuers to interpret such data. Katie and her daughter's lives after the tragedy became an example of the resilience of the human spirit. By 2016, the family had moved to the Portland area, fulfilling a dream that she and James had discussed during that fateful trip. Penelope, then 13, and Sabine, 10, grew up to be normal, healthy girls, although according to family friends, they missed their father very much. In December 2009, Katie and her daughters made a surprise appearance at the Josephine County Search and Rescue Christmas banquet to thank the people who saved their lives. This was shortly after she visited the site of the tragedy with Ray Kerr and Sarah Rubrecht, where, 3 years earlier, she had breastfed her daughters to keep them alive, and where the family had burned tires for warmth after their car ran out of gas. The physical injuries have healed, but the emotional scars remain. In a rare interview with 20 on 20 in 2011, Katie admitted that she struggles with guilt over the decisions she made on the road, but has focused on raising her daughters. "I have to be strong. They depend on me," she said. The Kim family tragedy is not just a story about the dangers of winter roads or navigation errors. It is a reminder that in the age of smartphones and GPS, it is still possible to get lost in the wilderness, to be overwhelmed by its forces, and that there is no foolproof remedy for human error and bad luck. But above all, it is a story about the power of parental love and self-sacrifice. James Kim, racked by hunger, cold, and exhaustion, walked 16 miles through impassable terrain trying to save his family. Katie Kim, left alone with 2 small children, gave her last ounce of strength to keep them alive. There are now signs in the Oregon mountains warning travelers of the dangers of Bear Camp Road. But the most eloquent memorial to James Kim remains his daughters, who grew up thanks to his final act of love, and the changes to the rescue system that have likely saved dozens of other lives since then. The Kim family tragedy forces us to ask ourselves questions that have no easy answers. What would you have done in James's place? Would you have stayed in the car, hoping for rescue, or risked everything for a slim chance of finding help? Can we judge the decisions of people on the brink of survival from the comfort of our homes? What if the real danger lies not in snow-covered mountains or the absence of roadblocks, but in our own self-confidence? In how easily we trust paper maps or electronic navigators, forgetting that technology is only a tool that can make mistakes. If this story touched you, like it, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every tragedy can be a lesson if we take the time to reflect on it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Take care and see you in the next episodes. Winter in the Kaibab National Forest does not forgive mistakes. In northern Arizona, from December to March, these 640,000 hectares of ancient forest become a death trap where civilization is but a distant mirage. December 2016 was particularly merciless. Nighttime temperatures dropped to -8 degrees Celsius, and snowstorms could strike suddenly, reducing visibility to almost zero in a matter of minutes. Under such conditions, a person without special training could die of hypothermia in 3 to 4 hours. A more insidious danger is wet clothing, which increases heat loss by 10 times and significantly reduces survival time. Forest Road 22. A narrow road winding through the heart of the forest becomes especially treacherous in winter. The asphalt quickly turns to gravel, then to a barely visible rut among the pines. The road is unmaintained from November through April, a fact known to locals but ignored by tourist GPS systems. Here, rescuers pull out dozens of motorists stuck in snowdrifts each year. Some are found too late. The highway leading to the north rim of the Grand Canyon is officially closed from October 15 to May 15th. This section at 2,400 meters above sea level turns into an Arctic desert in winter. Rangers warn, no exceptions for regular tourists. The area around the Grand Canyon becomes a high-risk zone for unprepared travelers in winter. The lack of cellular signal means that any malfunction becomes a fight for life. The contrast is striking. The same elevations that create spectacular scenery form climate traps. In this frighteningly beautiful and ruthless environment begins the story of a family whose holiday trip turns into a desperate fight for survival. Karen Klein, 46, an environmental science instructor at a Pennsylvania college, was the epitome of positive energy. Tall, with an athletic build, she always made time for a morning jog despite a busy schedule of lectures and research. In the past, she worked as an environmental educator, teaching children basic survival skills in nature, how to build shelter, what plants to eat, how to navigate by the stars, skills she never thought she'd apply in the actual fight for life. Her husband Eric was the complete opposite, a calm, judicious social worker. His passion was helping disadvantaged children. The year before the trip, Eric had suffered a serious back injury, and by December 2016 was still in the process of rehabilitation. Physical activity was difficult for him, but he never complained. Other people have a much harder time, he often said when Karen worried about his condition. Their 10-year-old son, Izzy, inherited his mom's energy and dad's kindness. An inquisitive boy with unruly hair and perpetually untied shoelaces, he grew up in a loving and supportive environment. At school, Izzy shone in science class, often sharing the knowledge he received from his mother. In his free time, he tended to his pets, who seemed to understand him better than some of his classmates. In Pennsylvania, the Klein family lived an ordinary middle-class life. A cozy house in the suburbs, a steady job, family dinners, and weekends in the park. But a few times a year they tried to break out of the routine to show Izzy different parts of America. Traveling became their way of creating special memories that wouldn't get lost among the monotonous, everyday life. December 2016, they decided to spend differently than usual. Instead of the usual visit to relatives for Christmas, the Kleins booked tickets to Las Vegas, not to gamble, but to show Izzy the city of lights and experiences, and then explore the famous national parks of the Southwest. After landing in Las Vegas, they rented a car and checked into a hotel on the famous Strip. The first days were filled with typical tourist attractions, a visit to the Wax Museum, where Izzy was photographed with wax doppelgangers of his favorite superheroes, walks through the neon streets of the city, where the boy enthusiastically looked at architectural copies of world landmarks. The highlight of the trip was to be the Cirque du Soleil show, Love, for which they had tickets for December 24th. The show, which celebrates the music of the Beatles, promised to be the perfect Christmas gift for the whole family. "We have 3 days between the show and coming home. Maybe we should see the parks," Karen suggested one evening while looking at a tourist map of the region. The idea seemed reasonable. Zion, Bryce Canyon, and the Grand Canyon were all relatively close to Las Vegas. 3 days was enough time to see the main attractions and get back to the show. Neither of them had checked the weather forecast for northern Arizona or road conditions. They were experienced travelers in the eastern states, but the West, with its extreme elevation and temperature differences, remained uncharted territory for them. Plus, their GPS unit, which had faithfully served them for years, seemed like a reliable guide through any terrain. This blind faith in technology and lack of information about the region's winter features were the first links in a chain of events that would soon bring the entire Klein family to the brink between life and death in the snowy stillness of the Kaibab National Forest. The morning of December 22, 2016, was clear and deceptively calm as the Klein family drove east out of Las Vegas. The plan seemed simple. Visit 3 national parks, Zion, Bryce Canyon, and Grand Canyon, in 3 days, and return to Las Vegas by the evening of December 24 for a Cirque du Soleil show. The schedule was tight but doable. At least that's what Karen thought as she studied the map in the passenger seat. Their first stop was Zion, a realm of red sandstone cliffs overlooking narrow canyons. In the summer months, there was an apple in the sky from the tourists, but in the winter, the park seemed almost deserted. They spent only a couple of hours here, taking a few pictures and taking a hasty tour of the visitors center. Izzy was particularly impressed with the stories of the mountain lions that still lived in the remote corners of the park. "Can we stay and look for them?" he asked, but Karen gently reminded him of his busy schedule. By noon, they were on their way. to Bryce Canyon with its famous hoodoos, bizarre stone columns created by erosion. Here the landscape was already showing signs of winter. Snow covered the tops of the cliffs, and the trails were partially icy. Eric, still recovering from a broken back, could go no further than the lookout. "You go ahead, I'll wait here," he said. But Karen decided they would stay together. They spent less than an hour in Bryce Canyon. "Next stop, Grand Canyon North Rim," Karen announced as she entered the destination into the GPS. The navigator calculated the route, showing an arrival time of 4:30 p.m. "We'll have time to watch the sunset over the canyon," she rejoiced, unaware that her plans were not destined to come true. The first warning sign was a message on the GPS screen. Route changed due to closed road. The main AZ-67 highway leading to the north rim of the Grand Canyon was closed for the winter. The navigator, failing to recognize the reason for the closure, automatically redirected them to an alternate route, along Forest Road 22. At first, the road seemed decent enough. Paved, though narrow, it meandered between the majestic pines of the Kaibab National Forest. Izzy looked at the snow-covered trees with delight, and Eric unconsciously gripped the steering wheel tighter, noticing how oncoming cars were becoming more and more rare. "It's strange that there are so few people here," Karen remarked when they hadn't seen a single car in about half an hour. Eric only shrugged. "Maybe it's not the season for tourists." About 45 minutes after they turned onto Forest Road 22, the asphalt ended, replaced by gravel. Another 15 minutes later and the gravel was gone, leaving only snow-covered dirt. The light snowfall that had started an hour ago had now intensified. Large flakes slowly descended on the windshield of the car, creating a hypnotic effect. "Maybe we should turn back," Eric suggested uncertainly, as the road became almost indistinguishable under the freshly fallen snow. "The navigator shows it's only 20 minutes to the Grand Canyon," Karen objected, though the GPS signal was becoming increasingly intermittent. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon on December 22, 2016, 8 miles deep off the main highway, their car came to an abrupt stop. Eric was attempting to make a U-turn on the narrow road when the rear wheel slipped into a shallow ditch hidden beneath the snow. The engine roared, and the wheels spun helplessly, but the car only got deeper into the wet snow and mud. They got out to assess the situation. The cold wind immediately crept under their lightweight city jackets. None of them were designed for temperatures below freezing. Izzy's cheeks and nose quickly turned red from the cold, and his sneakers were instantly soaked in snow. "Let's try putting branches under the tires," Karen suggested, remembering a trick from some survival TV show. They spent the next half hour gathering branches and shoving them under the tires that were spinning. Eric stepped on the gas. Karen and Izzy pushed from behind, but the car buried itself deeper and deeper in the spreading snow. "Phones!" Karen suddenly exclaimed, but a check of all 3 cellular devices showed the same thing. No signal. They were in an area completely devoid of cellular service. The GPS unit had lost its satellite signal too. The screen showed only a blank map with a flashing error message. Suddenly, their only technological guide in this wilderness was a useless piece of plastic. "What are we going to do?" Izzy asked, and fear sounded in his voice for the first time. Eric and Karen exchanged glances that read a growing realization of the gravity of the situation. It was rapidly getting darker. The temperature was dropping. The snow was intensifying. They were alone in the middle of nowhere with no communications, no suitable clothing, in a stranded car, 8 miles from the nearest major road. And ahead was a night that promised to be very cold in the Kaibab forest. The coming twilight painted the forest in ominous shades of gray. The snow continued to fall, and the temperature was rapidly dropping to -8 degrees Celsius. The Kleins gathered in the car, turning on the motor for warmth, to discuss options. Karen listed 3 possibilities: for everyone to go looking for help, to stay in the car and wait for a random passerby, or to go alone to get help. Eric immediately dismissed the first option. In the dark, with no flashlights or warm clothes, they risked freezing the whole family to death. The second option seemed no better. They hadn't seen a single car in the last hour and a half, and a night in the woods without enough fuel for constant heating was deadly. That left a third option. Eric couldn't go because of a recent back injury. Izzy was too small. The choice fell to Karen. "I'll go. I'm a runner. I have good stamina. If the road led us here, it can be used to get back out to civilization." Karen gathered the essentials in her pockets. Her cell phone, a few energy bars, and a bottle of water. "By my calculations, it's about 8 miles to the main highway. If I walk at a good pace, I can get there in a couple hours." They didn't know how optimistic that forecast was. "What if you don't come back?" Izzy asked, in a voice trying to be brave but losing to fear. "I'll come back, I promise. Or I'll send help. Most importantly, stay in the car, keep warm." She turned to Eric. Their gazes met, and years together allowed them to exchange 100 unspoken words. "If I'm not back by morning and help doesn't arrive, you may have to go too," she said quietly. "But wait for dawn first." At 3:30 p.m. on December 22nd, 2016, Karen Klein stepped from the relative comfort of the car into the cold stillness of the snow-covered forest. Through the fogged glass, Eric and Izzy watched her silhouette dissolve into the shroud of snow. In an instant, an ordinary family vacation turned into an ordeal where the stakes rose dramatically. What began as a carefree trip through national parks would now become a desperate struggle for survival in the merciless winter forest. And 3 destinies, hitherto inextricably linked, are now on separate paths. The first kilometers were relatively easy for Karen. Adrenaline energized her, and the hope of finding help drove her forward. She walked briskly along the ruts, checking her phone periodically, but there was no signal. The snowfall was intensifying. The beautiful winter evening was turning into a real blizzard. The wind was tossing prickly snowflakes in her face, making breathing and visibility difficult. The temperature dropped to -9 degrees Celsius by 1700 hours. A light fleece jacket could not protect from the biting cold. Jeans and shoes got wet. Each step was getting harder and harder, and we had not walked more than a third of the way. 8 miles, she repeated like a mantra. "I've run more than that." But running on a groomed track was nothing compared to traversing a snow-covered forest road in soggy shoes in sub-zero temperatures. By 6 p.m., the first signs of hypothermia had appeared: uncontrollable shivering, numb fingers, lethargy of thoughts. "You can't stop for long." She remembered the principle of survival in the cold. Only movement could maintain the necessary body temperature. In the stuck car, Eric wrestled with his own demons. Anxiety for Karen mingled with the need to calm his son. He periodically killed and restarted the engine, increasingly worried about the fuel supply. Izzy lulled in the back seat, wrapped in his jacket and his father's sweater. "Dad, do you think Mom has found help yet?" he asked. "Of course she has. She's probably on the highway by now," lied Eric. In fact, his anxiety was growing by the minute. He knew that even under ideal conditions, Karen wouldn't have made it to the highway by now. The snow had almost completely covered her tracks. The car stood in the middle of the white desert, as if cut off from the world. By 8 p.m., Karen had lost track of time and distance. The road now seemed only a vague shadow. She walked almost blindly, guided more by intuition. Her cell phone was dead in the cold. Movement was becoming difficult. Her thoughts were jumbled. First she thought about Izzy and Eric, then about the students, then about some absurd little thing. Karen knew it was a sign of hypothermia, when the brain works irrationally, but she couldn't stop this inner chaos. The blizzard had turned into a storm. Visibility was reduced to a few meters, and the temperature dropped to -11 degrees Celsius. At some point, Karen realized that she had been walking for more than 5 hours, but the highway still hadn't appeared. The idea of going back to the car was doubtful, as the blizzard had already covered her tracks. There was only one thing left to do: keep walking forward, hoping for a miracle. Eric lay awake, planning what he would do in the morning if Karen didn't return. The injury to his back caused constant pain, but he found it easier to think about the physical pain than the uncertainty that shrouded his wife's fate. The wristwatch showed midnight, 9 hours since their car had gotten stuck. The temperature had dropped to minus 12 degrees Celsius, and the wind was intensifying the cold feeling to minus 20 degrees Celsius. It was the coldest night of their lives. The morning of December 23rd greeted Eric and Izzy with pale light through the frosted windows. It had been an agonizing night. Their breath was turning to vapor, and they were running out of fuel. "Mom's not back yet?" Izzy's first waking question. Eric shook his head. The first thing he thought of was Karen couldn't find help. "I have to go look for help," he uttered, though inside everything was turning over at the thought of leaving his son alone. "No, Dad, don't go. We won't survive another night without fuel. I have to try," Eric quickly explained. Izzy would get most of the food and water, should only start the car when absolutely necessary, and not open the door for anyone except the cops or rangers. At 7:30, Eric stepped out into the freezing morning. The snow had stopped, but it had piled up knee-deep overnight. He walked in the opposite direction of Karen's route. Every step made his back ache. For Izzy, time stood still. With his father gone, he was left utterly alone amidst the vast white stillness. He turned on the radio, went through his belongings, counted his supplies, did everything he could to avoid thinking about his parents. When the cold became unbearable, he briefly started the engine. The thermometer showed minus 6 degrees Celsius inside the cabin. Eric had been walking for 5 hours. The pain in his back became constant, but he realized that stopping would do no good. By noon, he had accomplished the impossible. He had walked nearly 15 miles in the snow. Every kilometer was a test of will, but here, all his qualities of a father, ready to do anything for his family, were manifested. At last, a cleared road appeared ahead. As he climbed the hill, he saw a single streak of signal on his cell phone. With trembling fingers, he dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "We're in trouble. My wife is missing. My son is alone in the car. We're stranded in the Kaibab forest." Meanwhile, Karen had reached some road by dawn. Her body was on edge. Her muscles refused to obey, and her left leg was beginning to lose sensation. Along the way, she came across a road sign that read, "Grand Canyon Visitor Center, 6 miles. That gave her a new purpose, but her condition worsened by the hour. She walked all day with short breaks. By mid-afternoon, she had barely covered half the distance. Her mind worked only on instincts: to move, to breathe, to survive. At 2 p.m., a full-scale rescue operation began. The Coconino County Sheriff's Office mobilized 2 teams, one on snowmobiles headed for the stranded vehicle, while the other began gathering equipment to search for Karen. Eric, shivering with cold and exhaustion, sat in the warm cabin of the rescue SUV, marking his wife's estimated route on a map. By 4:30 p.m., the snowmobilers reached the car. Izzy had spent nearly 9 hours alone. When the snowmobiles with bright flashing beacons appeared through the twilight, he couldn't immediately believe his eyes. Exhausted, his eyes swollen with tears, the boy climbed out of the frozen vehicle and rushed to the rescuers. His first words were not about himself, not about the cold and fear, but about his mother. "Did you find Mom?" The rangers' hearts clenched. They knew that a woman who had spent over 24 hours in such conditions without proper equipment had minimal chance of survival, but no one said it out loud. After taking samples of Karen's footprints from where she had left the car, 5 experienced National Park Service trackers with search dogs set out on her intended route. They were to walk through the night on tracks that the blizzard had all but obscured. Eric and Izzy were wrapped in thermal blankets, given hot drinks, and evacuated to a hospital in Kanab, Utah. Both showed signs of frostbite on their toes, and Izzy suffered from mild hypothermia. The boy, exhausted by loneliness and fear, fell asleep as soon as the ambulance touched down, still clutching in his hand a picture of the family he had taken from his father's wallet. By the evening of December 23, Kaibab Forest had become an icy trap for a family separated by dozens of miles. Their Christmas vacation turned into a fight for life, where every decision could be their last. Karen reached the ranger cabin at the Grand Canyon at 3 o'clock in the morning on December 23rd. 26 miles through the blizzard were behind her. Her left foot, shoeless, left bloody footprints in the snow. The cabin was closed for the winter, dark, with boarded shutters. Wrapping her jacket around her arm, Karen smashed the window and squeezed inside, collapsing to the wooden floor. In the pitch darkness, she fumbled for a closet of blankets. Wrapping herself up, she climbed onto the bed. Her consciousness was hazy. Her body was on the verge of developing rhabdomyolysis. Decaying muscles were releasing creatine kinase into the blood, the level of which exceeded the norm by 50 times. His kidneys were on the verge of failure. Izzy thrashed around in his hospital bed. He couldn't sleep. The image of his mother walking out into the blizzard was in his mind's eye. Eric stayed close to his son, despite his own frostbite. Every half an hour he asked about the news of the search operation. It was the morning of December 24th. It had been 33 hours since Karen had left. In the cabin, dim dawn was breaking through the frosted windows. Karen had fallen into a semi-conscious state. Her temperature had dropped to a critical 35 degrees Celsius. Outside, the worst storm in a decade was raging. Wind gusts of up to 50 kilometers per hour and visibility of a few meters. The search operation was in danger of collapsing. 5 rangers decided to continue the search despite the warnings of the Weather Service. Orienting themselves by faint footprints, then by compass and intuition, they advanced along Karen's presumed route. "Dad, it's Christmas Eve. We're supposed to go to a show in Las Vegas," Izzy pronounced, looking at the blizzard outside the window. Eric squeezed his son's hand tighter. "We'll definitely go next year. The whole family." At that moment, the Coconino County Sheriff walked in. "Mr. Klein, can I talk to you for a minute?" Eric's heart sank. In the cabin, Karen no longer distinguished between reality and delusion. Suddenly, lantern beams cut through the darkness. Voices, a knock on the door. The door swung open, 5 rangers rushed inside, the beams sweeping around until they stopped on a coiled tangle of blankets. "Here! We found her! She's alive!" Karen was in critical condition. Frostbite, exhaustion, hypothermia. "My son! Husband!" was the only thing she could whisper. "They're safe! Everything's going to be okay now." At 2 a.m. on December 24, 34 hours after leaving the car, Karen was found. It seemed the worst was over, but her body was on edge and the fight for life was just beginning. A brisk wind whipped across the faces of the rescuers, carrying Karen to the snowmobile. It was several kilometers to the cleared road. Pulse weak, temperature critically low, the medic reported over the radio. "We need an emergency evacuation." The blizzard intensified, visibility dropping to near zero. The rangers moved in a chain, navigating more by GPS. Karen, wrapped in thermal blankets, fainted here and there, mumbling the names of her husband and son. At 5 a.m., rescuers reached the road where an ambulance was waiting. Medics hooked up IVs, started warming her up. "Do you think he'll make it?" the ranger asked the nurse. "A couple hours later, there would have been no chance," the man replied. "It all depends on speed now." At Kanab's hospital, the sheriff took Eric aside. "I have news about your wife. She was found alive." Eric's knees buckled and he leaned against the wall. "Where? How is she?" "At the ranger hut by the North Rim. Condition is critical but stable." Eric rushed over to Izzy, who was waiting anxiously on the bed. "Mom's been found. She's alive." The boy froze, then burst into tears. for the first time since they'd been stuck in the snow. In the early morning hours, the ambulance with Karen arrived at the hospital. Dr. Shannon Little was in charge of admissions. "What do we have?" "Female, 46 years old. Hypothermia, second-degree frostbite. Signs of dehydration and exhaustion. Labs showed creatine kinase levels over 10,000 units, with a normal of under 200. A sign of severe muscle tissue damage. We need to transfer her to Regional Medical Center," the doctor decided. "There's no hemodialysis equipment here." Eric and Izzy were only allowed a glimpse of Karen through the ICU glass. Even from a distance, they could see how she had changed. The gaunt face, the bluish skin, the tubes and wires all around her. "She's very strong," the nurse said. "To walk 26 miles in the snow, to survive in those conditions, it borders on the impossible." When rangers saw the cabin's broken window, they knew someone was desperate to survive. But no one could have guessed that inside they would find a woman who had accomplished the near impossible, driven by love for her family and an unyielding will to live. Karen was transported to Dixit Regional Medical Center in St. George, Utah, a specialized facility with an intensive care unit. The first 24 hours were critical. Doctors struggled not only with frostbite, but also with the looming threat of kidney failure due to the massive breakdown of muscle tissue. On Christmas Eve, the Klein family was separated, with Karen in the ICU and Eric and Izzy in a shared room at Kanab Hospital. No Christmas decorations, just sterile walls and the smell of medicine. But this day was a true miracle for them. All three stayed alive against all expectations. The next morning, Karen's condition began to stabilize. Strong IVs helped avoid dialysis, and the frostbite, though severe, did not require amputation. Eric and Izzy were transported to the same hospital to be closer to her. The first meeting after the rescue took place 48 hours later. Karen was still weak, but already conscious. When Izzy and Eric entered the room, she tried to pull herself up. There were no tears. All three were too exhausted. But the hug said more than words. "I knew you'd make it," Karen whispered, cradling her son against her chest. "And I knew you'd come back," Izzy replied, though they both realized it wasn't the complete truth. In those long hours of loneliness, they each struggled with despair. The medical staff who witnessed the scene did not hide their emotions. Even experienced doctors recognized that the Klein family's survival was an exceptional case of human resilience. Karen spent 5 days in the hospital. Her recovery was described by doctors as remarkably rapid for someone who had survived such an extreme ordeal. By December 29, the Kleins were ready to return home to Pennsylvania, although physical rehabilitation, especially for Karen, was a long road ahead. The story of their survival became a Christmas sensation in the region. Local newspapers called the case a Christmas miracle in Kaibab Forest. But for the Kleins themselves, the main miracle was that they were together again. Tired, scarred, but alive. The return to Pennsylvania was quiet, with no grand reunions. The plane landed in Philadelphia on the evening of December 29, 2016. The Kleins returned to their suburban home, which seemed so unaccustomedly cozy and safe now. Physical recovery was taking its course. Karen was undergoing intensive therapy to rebuild muscle tissue. Her left foot, the one most affected by frostbite, was gradually healing, although sensitivity was slow to return. Eric dealt with the effects of hypothermia more quickly, but his back injury worsened after the long transition, requiring additional treatment. But the most difficult part was the psychological recovery. Karen was plagued by nightmares and guilt. How could I leave them? Why didn't we turn back immediately when the GPS went haywire? Izzy was showing signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. Sudden sounds startled him, and snowfalls triggered panic attacks. Over time, an ordeal that could have torn the family apart only strengthened their bond. They began to appreciate every moment together more, finding joy in the simple things. "I used to always be in a hurry to get somewhere, chasing some achievement," Karen told a local newspaper a year later. Now I realize the ordinary moments are the most precious. Just sitting with a cup of tea, watching the birds outside the window, that's real happiness. Izzy, who was in therapy, found a way to reframe the traumatic experience. What my mom did is what she always did. She's the strongest person I know. And Dad, if he hadn't acted so quickly and effectively, Mom would have died. A year later, the Kleins did attend Cirque du Soleil's Love Show in Las Vegas. It was a peculiar point in history that changed their lives forever and showed what love can do when it comes to saving those closest to them. The Klein family's story is not just a tale of survival. It's a reminder of how easily modern man's reliance on technology can leave him defenseless in the face of wildlife. If you ever take a winter road trip, remember these simple rules. Always check your route ahead of time. Don't rely solely on GPS. Let someone know your plans and expected return time. Keep an emergency kit in your car, blankets, non-perishable food, water, flashlight. If you get stuck, stay in your vehicle. It provides cover and makes you more visible to rescuers. Run the engine periodically for warmth, making sure the exhaust pipe is not blocked by snow. Statistics show that more than 2,000 people in the U.S. each year find themselves in situations similar to what the Kleins experienced. More than half of the cases are due to over-reliance on technology. But the most important lesson of this story isn't in the practical advice. It is that the human spirit, motivated by love for loved ones, can transcend all physical limitations, accomplish the impossible, and return home from even the most hopeless situation. Winter in the Kaibab forest continues day after day, with new snowstorms hitting the expanse. But the Klein family story will forever be a reminder that only a thin line of our decisions can lie between survival and doom. Now the question for you is, what would you do if you were in their situation? Would you all stay together in the car, or would you do the same, sending the toughest one to get help? Many experts believe that the family should have stayed together, but then would they all have survived? Was it a mistake to completely depend on the GPS, or was it just bad luck that could have happened to anyone? Share your opinions in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to put a like, as well as subscribe to the channel that would not miss new incredible survival stories. There are still a lot of interesting things ahead. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episodes. Death Valley is not to be taken lightly. Stretching along California's eastern border, this national park is a sun-scorched depression surrounded by sharp mountain ranges. It is home to the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, Badwater Basin, 280 feet below sea level, and is also home to the highest temperature on Earth, 134.6 degrees Celsius. The Death Valley landscape is a mosaic of lifeless salt flats, scatterings of sharp rocks, and rare oases where deep groundwater bursts to the surface, creating tiny islands of life in a sea of unrelenting heat. Despite all the dangers, about 1 million tourists come here every year to see the beauty of the golden sands of the dunes and the colorful rocks of the canyons. Every year, dozens of tourists get into trouble in this rugged region. Park rangers tirelessly warn of the need for thorough preparation. A full tank of fuel, a water supply, at least 4 liters per person per day, paper maps, and off-road vehicles for remote areas. Safety in Death Valley is not just a recommendation, but a matter of survival. Cell phone service is virtually non-existent in the vast expanse of the park. Outside of tourist centers such as Furness Creek, one finds oneself completely cut off from the outside world. Each year, park officials record numerous incidents requiring search and rescue operations. And the July 2010 incident reminds us once again why this place has its ominous name. Donna Cooper has never turned down an opportunity to travel. At 62 years old, this resident of the small town of Pahrump, Nevada, still has the youthful enthusiasm of a pioneer and an unquenchable thirst for new experiences. Despite all the trials that have befallen her, a serious car accident in her youth, raising 8 children and a serious illness in Haiti in early 2010. Each crisis Donna has overcome with remarkable calm and determination. "I believe traveling makes us richer," she often said as she planned her next trip. In recent years, Donna crossed much of the American West, showing its beauty to her traveling companions. Next to Donna, on this July morning in 2010, were 2 young girls. Her 17-year-old daughter, Gina, was energetic, with a lively mind and a love of adventure inherited from her mother. There was a special bond between them based on mutual trust. The third participant was Jenny Lun, a 19-year-old student from Hong Kong. Arriving in America in May, she moved into the Cooper home on a cultural exchange program and quickly became almost a member of the family. Their transportation was a modest Hyundai Accent, a compact silver sedan. The car was ideal for city streets and paved highways, but was not designed for the rigors of off-roading. However, Donna, like most Nevadans, was used to driving considerable distances, and the car rarely let her down. Their packing was short that morning. Donna had put a few blankets and a basic toolkit in the trunk, a habit developed from years of traveling through the western states. The cabin held a few bottles of water, a bag of chips, a couple of apples and cookies, enough for a day trip, but woefully inadequate for what lay ahead. The fuel tank was only a quarter full, which under normal circumstances would be enough for about 100–120 miles. Driving out of Pahrump, Donna informed her friend Charlene that they were going to visit Scotty's castle in Death Valley. She had driven past it many times, but had never stopped to visit. Now, with 2 inquisitive companions, the moment seemed perfect. Neither of them could have guessed that a simple tourist trip would turn into an incredible struggle for survival in one of the most ruthless places on the planet. A challenge that would test not only their physical strength, but also their character, resourcefulness, and will to live. Thursday began with clear skies and anticipation of new discoveries. The sun was just rising above the horizon when the silver Hyundai Accent pulled out of Pahrump, a small town just an hour's drive from Death Valley. Donna Cooper, hands on the steering wheel, was enjoying the morning chill, realizing that by afternoon the temperature would soar to its usual July extremes. Gina and Jenny chatted softly in the back seat, discussing their upcoming visit to Scotty's castle, a mysterious landmark lost among the desert landscape. Donna occasionally glanced at them in the rearview mirror, pleased with their enthusiasm. Scotty's castle, officially known as Death Valley Ranch, was a 2-story Spanish colonial-style villa built between 1922 and 1931. Its history was filled with myth and intrigue. Chicago millionaire Albert Johnson erected the mansion for his ailing wife, hoping that the dry climate of Death Valley would help her health. However, he was made famous by the adventurer Walter Scott, nicknamed Scotty, who claimed to have built the castle with the proceeds of a fictitious gold mine. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they arrived at the castle gates. The contrast between the stark desert and the Spanish mansion with its pool, fountains, and lush gardens was almost surreal. Donna bought 3 tickets, the last transaction that would later help her relatives begin their search. For 2 hours, the women wandered the cool corridors, admiring the antique furniture and unusual interior. The castle kept pleasantly cool despite the temperature outside, thanks to the thick walls. The guide told stories about Scotty and his fantastic tales that attracted curious visitors to this remote location. Leaving the castle around 3 in the afternoon, they were greeted by a heat wave. The temperature exceeded 134.6 degrees Celsius, the air shivering over the red-hot asphalt. It was then that Donna noticed a sign for Racetrack Playa, a flat, dried-up lake known for the mysterious phenomenon of moving rocks. Over the years, rocks have left long trails, as if someone was pushing them across the bottom of the dried lake. The phenomenon, which had no scientific explanation until 2014, intrigued scientists and tourists alike. "I've always wanted to see this," Donna said, looking at a map of the park. Gina and Jenny enthusiastically supported the idea. Why not see another unique attraction? Donna pulled out her navigator and typed in Racetrack Playa. The device, programmed to find the shortest route, calculated the path and gave directions. According to the park's official recommendations, Racetrack Playa was 27 miles from the nearest paved road and could only be reached by a high-clearance vehicle. The women drove out of the parking lot of Scotty's Castle, unaware of how their spontaneous decision would turn out. The Hyundai Accent, reliable on city streets, was completely unprepared for the rigors that awaited it on the abandoned trails of Death Valley. They traveled west on Highway 267. Soon the asphalt changed to gravel, and they reached Tea Kettle Junction, a notable intersection named for an unusual tradition. Hanging from a signpost were dozens of tea kettles left behind by travelers. Some were covered with signatures and dates, while others were decorated with drawings and messages. This place marked the boundary between relatively passable roads and true tracklessness. Gina, who had replaced her mother at the wheel, stopped the car. Donna checked the GPS. The signs gave conflicting information. One directed to Racetrack Playa. The other warned of a difficult road not recommended for regular cars. Gina turned left, following the GPS directions. Their Hyundai began to make slow progress on the bumpy road, which became increasingly narrow and uneven. The car's low ground clearance forced them to move at a snail's pace. 10 miles later, Racetrack Playa never appeared. Instead, the road began to climb up into the mountains. What was once a dirt road had become an abandoned trail. "Let's ask for directions back to Scotty's Castle," Gina suggested, mentioning the GPS navigator. She pressed a few buttons, canceling the current route and requesting a new one. But it was here, in the deep canyons of Death Valley, that technology failed them. The satellite signal was weak and intermittent, forcing the GPS to constantly recalculate the route. The sun was slowly sloping toward the horizon, casting long shadows on the rocky ground. The temperature remained above 113 degrees Fahrenheit, but even more alarming was the fuel tank arrow. It was inexorably approaching the red zone after more than 100 miles of off-road driving, where fuel consumption was much higher than normal. Cell phones showed not a single streak of signal. They found themselves completely cut off from the world, wandering through a maze of mountain trails taking them further and further away from civilization. The odometer read more than 180 miles since leaving Scotty's Castle, and with each new mile they were running out of fuel. Their situation was becoming more and more critical. When the sun was almost hidden behind the ridge, Donna took over again. The car traveled another few hundred yards and stopped. The engine died, plunging them into the silence of the desert. There were no lights around, no sign of human presence, just the majestic silent canyons and the darkening sky. "Looks like we'll have to spend the night here," Donna said calmly, though inwardly she was well aware of the danger of their situation. The three women were trapped in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, with minimal water, no communication, and no fuel. The first rays of Friday's sun mercilessly exposed the reality of their situation. The odometer showed just over 200 miles since leaving Scotty's Castle. They had gotten deep into the wilderness of Death Valley. "We must act," Donna said, assessing the situation with a calmness developed from years of overcoming hardship. They took inventory of their meager supplies: the last bottle of water, 2 apples, leftover chips, and a few cookies. Gina was the first to get out of the car and cringed at the scalding air. The temperature was already climbing toward 113 degrees Celsius, and it was only morning. She began picking up rocks. Slowly, stone by stone, large letters appeared on an open patch of ground. "Help." The letters were large enough, about 13 feet long, to be seen from the air. Meanwhile, Donna and Jenny busied themselves with finding water. Being extremely thirsty, they tried to extract moisture from cacti and pine needles, but the results were minimal. Just a little bitter liquid, not enough to quench their thirst. They shared the last bottle of water equally, in tiny gulps, realizing they had to stretch their supplies as long as possible. Toward noon, the heat became unbearable. The air seemed to melt over the rocks, their skin burning even in the shade of the car. Jenny, faced with such extreme conditions for the first time, felt her fear and anxiety growing by the hour. As a foreigner, far from home, she had relied entirely on Donna's experience. Airplanes occasionally flew over them, small dots in the vast sky. The women tried every available method of signaling. Gina used the CD as a mirror, reflecting the sunlight. Jenny waved a bright yellow emergency blanket, but the planes continued on their way, oblivious to their desperate attempts to get attention. By Friday evening, Gina decided to explore the neighborhood. She hiked about 2 miles up the rocky trail, hoping to find help or at least a better view of the terrain to determine their position. As she climbed to a small elevation, all she saw was vast desert. No sign of civilization, just rocks and sparse vegetation as far as the eye could see. Meanwhile, in faraway Florida, Donna's daughter, Sky Cooper, was recovering from gallbladder surgery. She tried to call her mother several times, but all calls went to voicemail. It didn't cause alarm at first. Donna often went on spontaneous trips, but when 24 hours passed without word, Sky began to worry. She checked her mother's credit card accounts and found the last transaction: 3 tickets to Scotty's Castle, dated Thursday, 1 p.m. Nothing after that. In Pahrump, Charlene Dean, who had been keeping an eye on Donna's house, was also starting to worry. After contacting Sky, they decided to take action and contacted authorities. But neither the Nye and Inyo County sheriffs nor the Death Valley Rangers could begin a full-fledged search immediately. Too little information, too vast an area. On Saturday morning, something that could only be called a miracle happened at Donna's car. When they had already lost all hope that the car would start, Donna decided to try again, just to be safe. She turned the key, and to everyone's amazement, the engine came to life. Perhaps the small amount of fuel had redistributed in the tank overnight, or the battery had regained a minimal charge. The reason was unimportant. What mattered was that they had a chance. The resurrected car had become their lifeline. Donna instantly went from relief to action, realizing that every second the engine was running was precious. "Get in quickly," she commanded, and a moment later all 3 were inside. Donna drove the car in the most fuel-efficient mode possible, going in neutral on the downhills and picking up speed rapidly on the flat stretches before the uphills. If the car stalled now, there might not be a second miracle. At the bottom, the terrain leveled out, and a small salt flat opened up before them, glistening in the midday sun. In the distance, they noticed something unexpected: a wire fence, a locked gate, and some live trees. "Look, there might be people there," Gina exclaimed, pointing to the trailer standing behind the trees. The car was slowly approaching the fence when the engine stalled again. The last drops of fuel had run out, but it didn't matter anymore. They had found a sign of civilization. The 3 women struggled to climb out of the red-hot car. The heat was unbearable, the temperature exceeding 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground literally burned under their feet, even through the soles of their sneakers. Sweat evaporated instantly, and dehydration progressed by the minute. They walked around the wire fence and approached the gate. The abandoned camp consisted of 2 or 3 old trailers surrounding a wooden porch. The buildings looked abandoned, but in relatively good condition. Donna knocked on doors, calling out, but there was no answer. Going around the largest trailer, Donna found a treasure: a coiled garden hose connected to a water faucet. With trembling hands, she turned the vent. Seconds stretched into eternity as something rumbled in the pipes. Then the water came. Hot, metallic, but life-giving and real. The 3 women fell to their knees, greedily gulping water straight from the hose despite its scalding temperature. The first sips after nearly 2 days of thirst were like coming back to life. They filled every container they could find: empty bottles, soda cans, even plastic containers from the dumpster. No one knew if the water would flow tomorrow. Gina, showing resourcefulness, tried to break into the trailers. In one of them, Jenny was able to climb through a narrow window and found a few cans of canned beans and chili, a half-empty box of spaghetti, and oatmeal inside. Not much, but enough to keep her strength up for a few more days. It was unbearably hot inside the trailers. The sun heated the metal walls like an oven. They pulled the mattresses out onto the veranda, where at least there was shade. Donna opened the cans of food, and they ate for the first time in hours, silent and focused, as if performing a sacred ritual. By now, the mechanism for the rescue had already been set in motion. Charlene and Skye had contacted authorities in several counties. The California Highway Police activated a helicopter to search the remote areas of the park where Donna's credit card had last been used. Rangers provided maps of abandoned roads and coordinated ground searches. Ironically, it was cell phones, useless in the mountains due to lack of signal, that provided information on the women's approximate location, thanks to data on the last tower when they still had some connection. In the abandoned camp that became their refuge, the women kept trying to signal. They reinforced the help sign on the car, kept waving a yellow blanket at the sound of airplanes. The sun was preparing to set as Gina took an impromptu bath in the trailer, using the water from the hose to relieve the fatigue and grime of the last few days. Donna helped her wash her hair, just like when Gina was a little girl. This simple moment of maternal care in the midst of extreme disaster seemed almost surreal. By early Saturday, the third day of their ordeal, the heat seemed even more relentless. Temperatures soared past 122 degrees earlier than usual, as if the desert itself wanted to test the limits of human endurance. The abandoned campground was their temporary shelter, but conditions were far from comfortable. Mattresses dragged out on the veranda provided minimal protection from the blazing sun, but even in the shade the temperature exceeded 113 degrees Celsius. Every 15 minutes the women had to douse themselves with water from a hose. Donna continued to remain outwardly calm, but inwardly she was calculating her options. If help didn't arrive in the next 24 hours, they would have to take the desperate step of trying to walk to the main road. In this heat, that would be tantamount to suicide, but the alternative, starving to death in an abandoned camp, was no better. Gina became the physical leader of the group. Her youth and energy allowed her to actively continue her signaling attempts. She regularly went out into the open with a yellow emergency blanket, waving it at every sound of an airplane. On the hood of the car, in large letters of dust, was written, "Help, call police." She also tried lighting a signal fire, but the dry branches only burned, producing no discernible smoke. Jenny, the most vulnerable of the three, held on solely because of Donna's support. The culture shock of facing an extreme situation in a foreign country heightened her fear. Meanwhile, the search operation was gaining momentum. Charlene and Skye called every possible authority, the sheriffs of Nye and Inyo counties, California Highway Police, National Park Rangers. The story of the three missing women began to spread in localized news outlets in Nevada and California. The helicopter methodically scoured remote areas of the park, following routes that could lead from Scotty's Castle to Racetrack Playa. Pilots Tyler Jones and Scott Steele, experienced in search and rescue operations, knew that with each passing hour, the chances of finding the women alive were diminishing. The Rangers, meanwhile, were interviewing other hikers, checking log books at park entrances, and analyzing data from surveillance cameras outside Scotty's Castle. The puzzle was slowly coming together. Three women in a silver Hyundai Accent had probably headed for Racetrack Playa without sufficient preparation. The sun had already begun its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the three women's weary faces. It was the third day of their ordeal in the merciless desert. The temperature was finally beginning to drop, bringing a small relief after the hellish heat of the day. Donna, Gina, and Jenny were gathered on the veranda again, sharing canned beans, perhaps their last meal before deciding to march on foot to civilization. Jenny sat on the veranda watching the sky, a habit they had developed over the days. Any movement in the air could mean rescue. Suddenly she heard it, a distant but distinct and growing sound. At first she thought it was an auditory hallucination, a mirage for her ears caused by overheating and hope. But the sound grew louder and more distinct, Come out! Come out!" Jenny shouted, jumping to her feet and grabbing the yellow blanket. Donna ran out of the trailer, Gina hastily pulling on clothes. Jenny was already frantically waving the blanket around in the open where they could be spotted from the air. The sound was becoming deafening, throbbing in their hearts along with hope. And then they saw it. A blue and white helicopter with a California Highway Patrol emblem circling over the abandoned campground. From the loudspeaker came the pilot's clear voice. "You're safe." 3 simple words that meant the end of the nightmare. Tears streamed down Gina's cheeks, mixing with dust and sweat. Jenny continued to wave the blanket around as if she couldn't believe they'd been spotted. Donna just stood there, her face expressing deep relief after days of unspoken tension. 2 emergency medical technicians emerged from the helicopter. They carried bottles of water, real cold water that the women hadn't seen in 3 days. One of the paramedics took Donna's wrist, checking her pulse. "We were just about to pronounce you dead and fly you back to base," he said. The words hit Donna like a fist. They were so close to going undiscovered, doomed to a slow death from thirst and heat. After an initial examination, medics offered 2 options. A helicopter could take them to Lone Pine, the nearest town, but 1 at a time, which meant a long wait for 2. Or they could wait for the ranger, who was already on his way with a canister of gasoline and clear instructions on how to get out to the highway. The women chose the second option. Now that they had been found, they preferred to stick together until the end. About an hour passed. Sunset colored the desert in golden tones as a ranger's jeep pulled up to the camp. A tall man in uniform stepped out of the vehicle carrying a 5-gallon canister of gasoline. To the women, this simple canister looked more valuable than gold. The ranger helped pour fuel into the Hyundai's tank, then unfolded a map on the hood of the car. "You're here," he indicated a point on the map. "You need to follow this road east about 15 miles. It will take you out to Highway 190. From there, it's another 20 miles to Furnace Creek. There's a medical center and stores there." The instructions were clear and simple. The women thanked their rescuers, gathered their few belongings, and got into the car. Donna turned the key and the engine started again. This time, they knew exactly the way home. The women drove in silence, still not fully realizing that their ordeal was coming to an end. From time to time, Donna checked the map the ranger had given them. They didn't trust electronic devices this time, preferring paper and the clear directions of someone who knew the area. Dusk was settling in, and lights shone ahead like beacons, the first signs of human presence in 3 long days. Highway 190 greeted them with smooth asphalt that seemed like a luxury after the potholes and rocky off-ramps. Donna turned the wheel toward Furnace Creek, the park's tourist center, where help was already waiting for them. By the time they arrived at Furnace Creek, news of the miraculous rescue of the 3 women had already spread. Medics were waiting for them, ready to provide assistance. Despite 3 days in extreme conditions, the physical condition of all 3 was better than could have been expected. Donna, Gina, and Jenny were suffering from dehydration and exhaustion, but thanks to the water and canned food found in the abandoned camp and their own resourcefulness, more serious consequences were avoided. At the medical station, they were greeted with cautious surprise. It's not every day that people survive after so many days in July's Death Valley. Donna was immediately put on a saline drip, and Gina and Jenny were given special electrolyte drinks. The doctors examined each of them carefully, paying particular attention to signs of heat stroke or sunburn. By this time, the phones were already ringing off the hook. Skye Cooper was in tears talking to her mother, thanking heaven for saving them. Charlene Dean was preparing the house in Pahrump for Donna's return. Jenny's parents in Hong Kong, awakened in the middle of the night by a call with news of their daughter's rescue, couldn't believe she had survived such an ordeal. After medical examinations and procedures, the women were allowed to rest at the Furnace Creek Motel. A clean bed, air-conditioned air, and cool tap water, simple comforts that now seemed like incredible luxuries. They slept long and deep, without nightmares or worries, knowing that the worst was over. The next day, the Rangers arranged transportation to Pahrump. Before leaving, the ranger station chief invited the women in for a brief conversation. He was interested in the details of their journey, especially the decision to follow the GPS directions through Tea Kettle Junction. The information they provided was invaluable in preventing similar incidents in the future. But most important were the quiet moments when Donna, Gina, and Jenny were finally in the safety of home, realizing how close they had come to the line beyond which there was no return, and how much the ordeal had brought them together. The events in Death Valley left a mark on each of the women's lives. The physical effects, dry skin, fatigue, and slight dehydration, quickly passed, but the psychological impact was more profound. "I didn't doubt for a second that we were going to make it out," Donna said in an interview on the 20 by 20 program a few months later. Her confidence and calm during the crisis helped the group survive, confirming life experience as an invaluable resource. For Gina, the ordeal was a turning point. Inspired by the work of the paramedics who saved them, she enrolled in nursing school, determined to dedicate her life to helping others in critical situations. Jenny returned to Hong Kong, but the experience created an unbreakable bond with the Cooper family. Less than a year later, she came to America again, already as a university student, living in their home. The survival experience taught her not to be afraid of hardship in a foreign country. In 2011, ABC organized a reunion between the women and their rescuers to film a segment of 20 by 20. When the helicopter landed and pilots Tyler Jones and Scott Steele got out, Donna was the first to cross the space separating them. Hugs, tears of gratitude, unspoken words. The moment was filled with genuine emotion. The story of the three women became a textbook example for the Death Valley Rangers. They coined the term death by GPS and reinforced the warnings, always take paper maps. GPS can guide you on impassable roads. A week without GPS is always better than a day without water. The updated brochures now included the requirement of a full tank of fuel and a gallon of water per person for the day. The case reminded the world that even in the age of technology, nature requires respect and preparation, but it also showed the strength of the human spirit, resourcefulness, and the importance of remaining calm in the face of danger. The three women entered Death Valley as ordinary travelers and came out with a story of survival that is part of the legacy of this harsh but beautiful place. The story of Donna, Gina, and Jenny makes you wonder about the fine line between adventure and disaster. What if they hadn't found an abandoned campground with water? What if the helicopter had turned around a few minutes earlier? This story ended with a rescue, but the desert is dotted with the unmarked graves of those less fortunate. Perhaps the most important lesson of this story is that even in the age of smartphones and satellite navigation, our survival still depends on basic skills and common sense. We become so dependent on technology that we forget about everything else. Are you prepared for a situation where technology lets you down? If you like this survival story, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. In the comments, tell us about your most extreme wilderness experience or how you prepare for traveling to remote places. Each week we break down new survival stories so you can learn from other people's mistakes, not your own. Thanks for watching, and see you in future episodes.